Good afternoon and welcome to this session on numbers for policy and for science journalism. My name is Michele Catanzaro. I'm a science journalist based in Barcelona, and I'm here to discuss with Andrea Saltelli about 4 examples of numbers, of the sort of numbers that Andrea calls crisp numbers. Somehow, that is, numbers that have this, let's say, shared 2 features. First of all, they are the media love them, so they are used in the media as somehow black boxes, as well-grounded, objective, universals measures that you can completely rely on. And secondly, they have a strong political impact. Okay, so they can drive or push towards certain specific courses of action in policy. So the 4 examples we will discuss, now I do a spoiler, 2 of them are related to, let's say, our wrongdoing against the environment, so environmental footprint and the cost of climate inaction in a given time frame. And 2 of them are rankings. The famous Shanghai ranking for the quality of university education, and the famous as well, very, very famous as well, and very influential PISA ranking. What I understand Andrea will do is basically unbox this number. That is, check what's inside them, how they are built, and show that there are a lot of assumptions, gaps, biases in them, that if are not properly taken into account by us reporters when reporting on these issues, may lead to misinformation or even eventually to misguided policies. So we will basically try to see, let's say, what's wrong with these numbers, what are the practical political implications. So this is not a scholarly academic discussion on the sound definition of certain numbers, but it's something that has a real impact in the real world. And we will also try to discuss altogether how we can better tackle the underlying problem as journalists when dealing with these subjects. You also, and now I refer to the public, will have the opportunity to discuss the issue. I will leave some space for a couple of questions after each one of the 4 examples. And hopefully we will have about 10 minutes for a broader question at the end of the session. So the real expert here, of course, is Andrea Saltelli. His background is in physical chemistry, but he has done research in environmental sciences, applied statistics, impact assessment, science for policy. From 2005 to 2015, he worked at the Joint Research Center of the European Commission. He was the head of the unit of econometrics and applied statistics of that organization. Then he worked at the University of Bergen at the Center of Study of the Sciences and of Humanities. And now he's currently here in Barcelona, where I am, at the Open University of Catalonia. He has studied subjects like evidence-based policy, the crisis of science, sociology, and ethics of quantification. And maybe a recent contribution you may have heard about is a very interesting manifesto he and other scholars have published in Nature some time ago, called 5 Ways to Ensure That Models Serve Society, that was partially triggered by the use of mathematical and computational models of the pandemics that we are living. And that is really a very interesting reading. It really provides 5 rules of the thumb to make the most out of this model without incurring into, let's say, black boxing them, okay, into using them as black boxes. So, Andrea, first of all, welcome. And before entering in discussing the 4 examples, I would like to ask you an introductory question. That is, whether you could give us somehow your intellectual coordinates. Okay, what is the theoretical framework, the culture in which that have brought you to challenge these very popular and very successful measures? I understand you work under this paradigm, this idea that is starting to get known, the postnormal science. You are carrying out a critique of evidence-based policy. So yeah, up to you. Maybe if you can give you a very short summarized theoretical background in 5 minutes.
Well, my trajectory is maybe is a bit unusual because I started as a natural scientist, then I did a lot of statistics. I was a truly believer in many forms of quantification, but then with time I started become a bit more skeptical. And the skepticism, what as a beginning, being a technical person doing number crunching, were technical objection to the way they were built, but increasingly I thought that there were epistemological problem. Epistemology being how do we know that we know? So if we think that we know, but we don't know because the way we are using to know is wrong, this is really an epistemological error. And I think in many cases, also reflecting through the lenses of post-normal science, I come to understand that there were deep epistemological problem in many of these measures. They were really in a sense performative. So they under the impression of wishing to describe, they were in fact shaping. And in shaping, this means that they were projecting on what was being measured a precise ideology and bias, of course.
And Andrea, could you, since post-normal science is a word that we are going to hear more and more in this community, maybe now it's not very popular among journalists, but it's something that is certainly expanding. Could you give a very brief idea of what is post-normal science? What are you referring to when you use this word?
Well, post-normal science is very difficult to define. In fact, it's not so. It's a very humble way to approach a scientific problem with a healthy dose of critical skepticism. If you wish, it's very much follows the norm of science. No, it's very scientific in a sense. Because it suggests that we should be more reflexive about what we create by way of doing science. And this was created by many years ago, actually, in the early 90s by two scholars, Silvio Fontovic and Jerry Ravets, both living, though Ravets is now quite old, he's over 90 years old. But this, since the very beginning, they tackled very carefully the issue of how do we treat numbers. And they thought there was something wrong in the way we treat numbers. There are many books about that. There are books which I don't know. These books talks about the fascination of number. Other books talk about the trust of number. So those numbers had a lot of attributes which make them very much a social construct. And post-normal science was very early on this. You know, they were doing this when everyone, sorry.
Yeah, no. So I understand that somehow what we are going to discuss about in this afternoon is a criticism to this very popular and apparently very positive idea of evidence-based policy in terms of policy based on certain indicators, certain numbers. And am I right if I say, in order, let's say, to make concrete what you are saying, that what we are living in the COVID crisis is an example in which post-normal science in action? I mean, a situation in which there is a big uncertainty, high stakes, and moreover, we need to make decisions. We cannot wait for the evidence to accumulate. Would that be?
Absolutely, this is clear that there is really no discussion here. Facts are uncertain, decisions are urgent, values are in dispute. I mean, this is really 100% a setting where you need a way of acting which is post-normal in relation to science. And
okay, fine. Okay, so let's go to the first of our examples. It's something that is very, very popular among journalists, the idea of environmental footprint. So I'm sure the people that are joining the conference have certainly read and maybe even written articles of the sort, on say August 22 or whatever, we have exhausted the planetary balance, okay? Yeah. Or by the end of the year, we will have used 1.5 planets, okay? These sort of things. That narrative comes from this number, from this specific number, which is the environmental footprint. So, Andrea, could you tell us in always shortly in 5 minutes, what is the environmental footprint, and what do you find that what are the issues that you find in it?
Yeah, I had to tread carefully because, as I said, you know, this index is really loved by many people, and many people consider that this index does a very good job, and it does indeed, not to show man that we are overusing the planet. I mean, there is nothing wrong with the concept. The concept is interesting, is useful. Normatively, we all agree that is helpful, that we make the point that we are overusing the planet. The point is how this is done, because if it is done in a way which is technically and epistemologically, as we were saying before, unsound, then we will be accepting that the end justify the mean, that we will be in full consequentialism. And the index is really, I mean, I don't have adjective to define how how incredible it is in the way it is constructed. You want to capture something which is very complex in a single number, but then when the referring to the number you just said, 1.6 planet or 1.7, 1.72 in last year, there was 1.72 planets. This giving 3 digits of the precision to the how much we are overusing the planet is totally meaningless. We could be using the planet much more, depending what you are looking at. According to this, 1.7 could be 17 or 1700 or 17 billion or infinity, because when we do to the planet something which is irreversible, like depletion of resources, extinction of a species, there is no time limit, it's an infinity. So really those numbers cannot be defended in any way. So clearly the narrative is very catchy. Oh, if we could take Mathis Wagernagel, which is a very nice guy, I mean, I like him a lot, but he says, oh, if we could take away 5 days every year, we would have done a good job. Fantastic narrative, but, you know, based on terrible models, terrible number. This is could be even, I mean, most people claim that this could be even optimistic in a sense, now, because it says, you know, if we could push a bit back, we would be back in track. No, there is not back in track. We have already done a lot of irreversible damage. So, you know.
So I understand the environmental footprint index somehow tries to calculate a balance between what we take from the planet and what the planet can offer to us, okay? And your point is that there are some flows. I mean, that it doesn't take into account the all things we are taking out from the planet. So, for example, the irreversible things, they are not taken into account.
I don't know, if you talk about persistent organic pollutants, use of renewable resources, but already if you look, the index is only based on CO2, okay, on how much CO2 we emit and how much the planet can absorb. But if we, instead of looking to CO2, we look to nitrogen, now nitrogen loading for agricultural purposes, we are doing much more. So you see,
so we are using much more units of the planet, let's say.
Exactly, we're using more planets. So we're using 7 or 8 planets in terms of nitrogen, if I remember well. So
yeah, there's something interesting I've seen in your papers, that you say that this index sometimes have a sort of sedating or comforting effect in terms of, okay, so if you're using, you know, 1 planet and a half, so, you know, we are just half a planet away of doing it right, okay?
Yes, we use the word we use the word sedate, no, because you are sedated, because you think you can do something, and, you know, it's reassuring. I mean, this is also what was said by a high-level commission with P2C, Stiglitz and Amartya Sen, which they made in 2009, I think, a big review of all the measures of well-being, and they found this index. I said, no, this is embarrassing, this shouldn't be used. And they said you should use maybe carbon footprint or water footprint, but this global ecological footprint cannot be used. It's really
okay. No, so
but it's true.
I think here you are pointing to something that will come out over and over in our discussion, that is trying to reduce a problem that are multidimensional to one number should be a red light, let's say, for journalists, okay?
In a sense, this is a epistemological error, because if you do that, so you give people the impression that you can constrain a complex problem to a single number, and then associated to this expression, there is an idea of control. If I can number it, I can express it, and hence I can control. Whilst the best philosophical standpoint would be to say, no, we are not in control at all. No,
okay,
a standpoint where I say, no, we are really, you know, in a situation where we are not controlling. That's the truth.
But look, I mean, one could say, you know, one could deem this as a really scholarly discussion, because, I mean, what if a wrong number, let's say, points to the right political action, okay? So, I mean, you started by admitting that, okay, it's the general idea that we are overusing our planet, let's say, it's not bad, So,
it's excellent.
who cares if it's a 1.5 or 2 planets, okay? So is your criticism, a scholarly one, or do you think using this specific index may really drive wrong policies? Or first of all, it may drive misinformation, which is what we are more interested in as journalists, but finally, it could really bring to mistaken policies.
Yes. No, but exactly. One should read the paper for that, because then we enter into the detail. But this would bring to the wrong policy. Typically, if you follow the ecological footprint, you don't want to import food, because importing food implies using ghost land. So a country which wanted to decrease its footprint should try to grow everything inside. And this is, not a very intelligent policy, because, we have trade. If we can trade food, why not trading food for other resources? So, there are really, but I believe nobody is so crazy that they stop importing food in order to decrease their footprint. But still, this could well happen if one did follow those recommendations of the index for policy. One would implement wrong policies.
And so, as I said at the beginning, we want to make this a constructive session, okay? So and especially thinking about the public of journalists, that is, what do you think would be a more, there is a big fascination whenever some organization, I think in this case, the Environmental Footprint Network is the leading organization, but whenever one organization releases an index that says, today we have overshot the balance of whatever, okay? Whenever this is issued, the media will pick it, okay? So it's very difficult to unwind this, okay? But what is a more reasonable way of approaching this sort of problems? Is it a matter of telling a different story, bringing, what would you suggest, let's say? What would you like to see in the media instead of
I don't want to. Yes, I don't want to shoot on all kind of metrics. Very often when people develop something like index of this dimension, is because they want to point a finger at a certain problem, which otherwise would be lost. There are things like, I don't know, corruption. How do you measure corruption? Excluding multidimensional. If you try to make an index, at least you will tell some countries, which could get away with that they are indeed like the Netherlands or Luxembourg or other country, that something very problematic is happening over there, however imprecise the measure. So I'm not saying that this measure should not be used, but I'm saying that as a citizen and as a technical person, everyone should participate to this. So which is another element which comes from post-normal science. Now, it says all these quantification are social activities, so we should do it together. So society takes those numbers, look at those numbers, and engage with them in a critical way. By engaging, we can say, okay, good that you say that we are using too much, but your measure is really sucks in a sense.
So maybe in order to bring this to the field of journalism, maybe an intelligent story would be what you pointed at the beginning. That is, okay, we are using 1.5 planets in terms of CO2, but if you use...
But beware, exactly.
Beware, if you look at nitrogen,
exactly. That would be
the problem.
Exactly. The multiplication, the answer would be the multiplication of the viewpoint. That would be a best recipe. So look at more voices coming from different disciplines, but also from non-discipline, also from the lay person, because very often this person have quite something to offer.
I understand that this issue of bringing in a plurality of stakeholders is definitely a key element of this post-normal science paradigm. I have some concerns on this point, on the representativity of stakeholders, but maybe I will leave this for the final discussion. I invite the people that are joining the session to post their questions. I think I will receive them in my chat box. And because now would be the moment to pose the question of the public on this specific issue, that is whether you have any doubt on what we have said on the environmental footprint. Otherwise, we move to the next point. But before that, as a journalist, another thing that I think would be an interesting story, let's say, in what you have said, is pointing to the irreversibility. That is, this balance narrative, that, okay, we have exhausted the balance, seems to convey to the point that at some point, by, saving a lot, we may restore that balance. But what you are saying is that there are things that when they are lost forever. Okay, and so that may be another way of telling a more nuanced story. Okay, so I remind you to send questions if you want. Otherwise, we move to the next example. The next example is the famous Shanghai ranking, also known as Academic Ranking of World Universities. So here, the stories that we may have read or we may have even written are stories like, for example, you know, this and that university are among the first 50 in the ranking. So, and maybe not even like this, they are among the first 50 best universities in the world, one would title, or stories, or for example, politicians claiming that they are carrying out the right policies because the university of a country or a region are increasing their position in this ranking, or let's say opposition politicians saying, oh, we are dropping in the Shanghai ranking, what's happening, what are we doing wrong, etc. This, for example, is still quite popular in Spain where I live. I mean, the media are not buying it anymore that much, but for example, we continuously receive press releases by, you know, this and that university saying, hey, look how good we have come out in the Shanghai ranking, okay? So once again, Andrea, what is your, I mean, could you tell us, could you unbox, let's say for us, the Shanghai ranking, what's inside it, and what is a reason of concern in believing blindly in it?
Well, 5 minutes is not enough, but this Shanghai ranking is only one of a family of ranking. There is also another famous one done in the UK by the Times Higher Education. And if you look at this, you see that UK universities are higher than on the Shanghai. Then there is one done in the USA, the US News and World Report series of ranking, which is very much used over there. All these ranking have in common, again, that they constrain something which is almost impossible. I mean, universitas come from this word universe, no? Suggests that universalia, suggests that there are many things inside, right? And how you want to compress them into a single number. So this is probably the main error which you can claim this ranking do. But unlike the ecological footprint, which is in a sense socially innocuous, I mean, at least to my impression, I worked for this for a number of years, I believe, you know, doesn't do that damage in a sense. These rankings, they do a lot of damage, serious damage, because they have de facto created a global market for higher education, which has sent prices skyrocketing. And so in practical terms, they have created, you know, a winners and loser kind of distribution, which exalt inequality, no, and make prices go high in a way which will automatically increase the selection. You know, that university will not be a mechanism for inclusion, but for further exclusion, but further increase in inequality. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you, but you know. I mean, I've seen how this ranking is defined, and they take into account things that seems to be reasonable, like, for example, how many Nobel Prizes or field medals are included, belong to the university, the number of highly cited researchers, etc. I understand that you question not only the effect, you question even the definition. I mean, the actual weights that are put on top of each one of these dimensions. I mean, from what? Yeah. Please go on.
Well, okay, first, no, because if you look at each of them, you can be specific. So if we look at ARWU, we have Nobel winners of Nobel Prize, both among professors and among alumni. Then you have highly cited research, you have number of citation, number of articles in Science and Nature, and then you have all of the above normalized by number of staff. This to say that what we are measuring here is the power of a university as a producer of science, you know, and probably technology. So we are not measuring at all, in a sense, the educational capacity of a university. Or maybe if you look at the one done by the British, they listen a lot to the employer, prospective employer of students. So we are looking at university as a way of securing a well-paid job in one, you know, top institution. So again, those measures are really biasing not only the definition of what is good for a university, but also what is good for life in general. No, so
but
really,
so do you mean that the measure is sort of mathematically flawed, or is it that the choice of ingredient that they put in the measure is biased?
Both. There is the choice of the variable bias in the direction. The one evaluating a university has a scientific powerhouse. It could be a big lab. At this point, I mean, the same variable could be used to rank a big laboratory. You remember when we had a Xerox laboratory, when we had one Xerox laboratory or a big American laboratory like, you know, Sandia or Argo National. Well, that could be ranked by the same ranking. So we are using a ranking which could be used for a major science and technology production entity, or even commercial, even a corporation one. So, but then there are also technical errors, because then we could discuss the way this variable is combined doesn't correspond to what the developers purport to be measuring. But this becomes a kind of a technical argument. I would not like to enter into it now, because then we enter into aggregation issue and things of this nature.
Sorry. Okay, and you pointed to the fact that this is a damaging one, okay, from your point of view. For example, I found somewhere that it could really push, I mean, the universities could make decisions, sort of artificial decisions, in order to improve their ranks without any impact on the quality of the job they are doing. For example, merging universities may automatically bring to improving ranks. Could you elaborate on that? I mean, what sort of damages could the index make?
In one of the first papers we wrote with that a number of years back, we were looking at what Sarkozy was doing in France. They were merging university in order to increase the ranking, because Shanghai in particular is not normalized by size. So the bigger the university, the bigger the output. Of course, if you have a larger university, you have more chances of having produced more Nobel Prize winners, right? So the idea that merging university would increase the score. So, but this merging then was felt as a tragedy by the involved institution, because this led to shedding of staff, to, you know, was really not optimal in terms of many other variables which were there. So when I say that this is damaging, it's not only for the family and the student and their family in terms of cost, but also in terms of national policy, because then you can have that grants are allocated to this university of funds based also on these measures. But this doesn't make any sense, because you could have a fantastic university which does a fantastic educational work in a region of the country which is perhaps, you know, not the richest, and which where the human, you know, capital and the census of the student is not so high, and this university will not get any grants, which would be those who need it the more. So it's a mechanism again to pump money toward the top.
But look, I mean, I would say that some policymakers, this is precisely what they're aiming. I mean, of course, resources are limited, and of course, we need to invest the money in those organizations and those universities or whatever that have a more positive impact on the country. Okay, I mean, for example, this has been hot topic in Spain for a lot of time. There is a big discussion on excellence, on, you know, universities often portrayed as a place that is filled with bureaucracy, not a place in which the production of knowledge, the transfer is not excellent, etc. So, I mean, one would say, what is the alternative? If you need to rank researchers, institutions, institutes or universities, if you want to avoid a policy that is just treating everybody the same, and so those that are doing well and those that are not doing well. You also want to drive better behavior.
Yes, Michele, this is really the official narrative, no? Which is contrasted by books like this very nice book by Katie O'Neill, Weapons of Math Destruction. And they also discuss university ranking, and the same story in this other book, The Tyranny of Metrics. Both the books are very little books, can be read very quickly, and I enjoy reading them a lot. No, in fact, no, what you say is not actually true, because very recently, for instance, in Germany, they went and measured the impact of having introduced this excellent policy, and they found that they were a victim of the law of unintended consequences, because by pushing the researcher to produce more papers, what happened? They produce suboptimal papers, or they produce 3 papers when they could produce 1. And so they saw that those universities which received those grants are marked for excellence that did not improve. And those universities which did not get those grants and were not the subject of this excellence initiative, they went actually up. There is a very recent report on this, on Germany. But we know that. We know that this is exactly what would happen. And in the UK, for instance, there is a lot of soul searching on this excellence initiative. They have been discussing this a lot, especially for this reason. If you push researchers towards certain behavior which are meant to increase their efficiency, what you increase instead is their gaming of the system.
And so, you know, I mean, as journalists, we really need to navigate among enormous amount of information. And for us, it's often very useful to know, you know, this institution, this university is one from which I will get relevant, high quality science, and this one, be careful. So is there a way you would suggest to navigate the issue in a reasonable way for a journalist? I mean, without incurring into, you know,
reading what they do. I mean, you know, as we say, there is only one way to judge the quality of a paper, you know, and this is to read the paper. And there is no, I mean, you have to know the teacher and the paper, and you know, this shortcut. I mean, let me say something I haven't said so far. All this ranking of higher education would collapse immediately if one included as one of the variable the cost. Okay, they would completely be scrambled, because, you know, those universities, in order to achieve that high ranking, are very expensive, no? And in order to attract more students and grow in the ranking, they build fabulous sport facility on campus. I mean, you know, there is a total machinery of this. And
so maybe one should measure for every euro that enters what is the output, you know? And
yeah, but so again,
that,
but this would be a suggestion for some journalists who has the time. Why don't you take one of these ranking, and then you take the cost of this university and you look at them, you know, side by side, and you know.
And okay, Andrea, sorry to interrupt you. There is a question from the public. People is asking, do you see differences between private indexes and algorithms used in the evaluations exercises of research institutions, like in the UK or Italy? There are, of course, abuses, but is it all negative? And the person says, I am referring to ANVUR, which I think is an Italian organization of evaluation. So do you see differences?
Yes, there are, of course, differences, and every situation has to be investigated in its own merits. But what I'm saying is that what we are witnessing in this period is that after an initial period of enthusiasm for this kind of metrics, for this kind of measurement, we are moving. It's not just me. I mean, you know, society is moving in a direction of more critical reflection. I mean, if you look at my country, I read every way the ferocious discussion about evaluation, even at the level of the school, at the school level, like in Balsi and all other tests. So we live in a society which engages, rightfully, I believe, no, engage with those measures and question them, no, in their effectiveness.
And there is another question.
Sorry.
There is another question about the H index to rank scientists. One of the person is asking, in my experience, several journalists rely on this index and publication count to find reliable sources. Do you think it's a good way to find an important sources?
I have a big H index. Okay, so I'm one of those who exploit this system in a sense, no? But this is a terrible system to evaluate research. This is a terrible system to evaluate research, because of course my index is large also because I'm old. No, so you should say, okay, so we should have the index, but we should consider, you know, divide by age and so on. But again, if you evaluate research in this way, you will crystallize what is. You will not allow the system any kind of entropy. No, you will not process in the system a young researcher which maybe has only 2 papers, but these 2 papers are fantastic. I maybe have 100, but you know, nobody read them. So you see, I mean, you know, you really have to be careful, because by the way, when they were created, these measures were not meant to use to evaluate research. They were meant for bibliothecarian, you know, for handling, you know, various measures of impact, of citation, for looking at how the journals were doing. They were not supposed to be measure of the evaluation of research. And today they have been they have become measures of the for evaluate the quality of research. But you cannot judge my quality by my age factor. You know, I could be a lousy scholar with a very high age factor. You know,
okay. And one more question. So you are saying that any ranking has the effect of pushing the worst to be better, and while the good ones struggle to keep their position? This is more a matter of social psychology than a matter of statistical methodology. Should we keep these indexes secret and limit their circulation among the lay public?
No, absolutely. This is a road I would never take. But whilst you use the word psychology, I would prefer to use the word philosophy or epistemology or ethics, if you wish. No? Because in the use of these measures, there are a lot of things which boil down to measures of ethics, of fairness, to measure of epistemology. How do we know what we know? And so on and so forth. So secrecy is surely the worst solution of all. I mean, we make progress. So we capture the limit of these measures because people go out, you know, and start looking at them and start making remarks, you know, the way they work.
So, I mean, I guess the take-home message for journalists is be careful with these rankings. Me personally, I can give my personal experience that when I looked inside this ranking, I realized that it wasn't really worth to give that sort of news. You know, this university in Barcelona is ranking better than last year. Okay.
Michele, let me only say one thing.
Yeah.
Statistics, you said. Those rankings are totally volatile. Volatility is a word we use to indicate that the ranking could jump up and down furiously, depending just touching lightly the variable. I mean, they are not stable at all. So very often you have fluctuation of university, which have nothing to do with the quality of the university.
Okay.
Just,
okay. So yeah, since we have two more examples and both of them are very interesting, let's move forward to the other one. And I remind to the public that they can post their questions, and I will post them as soon as I can. So this one is somehow controversial because it's a really hot topic, climate change. Okay, so this idea of the cost of climate inaction in some time from now. So, for example, the cost of climate inaction in 2100. So let's say in almost a century from now. If we don't take the proper climate action, these will have a cost. So I must admit that this looks like a very smart way of posing the issue. That is, now we see climate action as an expense, but in the long run, it's really a saving because we will save a lot of money that will be spent in the future. So once again, why this measure infuriates you?
Well, it's a bit like the ecological footprint. In order to do something useful, which would be to promote action, I mean, there is no contention about climate change. Climate change is there. We don't understand it very well. Even the model we describe climate change as such have difficulty to tell you, for instance, how much temperature will increase if we double the amount of CO2. There are numbers going around, but those numbers are terribly uncertain. If on top of this uncertainty, we want to say what will happen to society 50 years from now, 100 years from now, we are into the world of pure fantasy. You know, there is no way any of these processes can be put into crisp numbers. I mean, take this book, for instance. This is a book by Nicholas Stern, and he advocates for using a larger and larger model, better and better model to compute the cost of climate. And they say, oh, this model should embrace the real possibility of creating an environment so hostile that physical, social, and organizational capital are destroyed, production processes are radically disrupted, and so on and so forth, describing these scenarios. But these are scenarios, these are scenarios. You don't convert those things. Or how do you put in number, the organizational capital loss? I mean, of course, the economists are very brave. They can put everything in number, but those numbers are again numbers which are so uncertain that there are no, or the case for climate change. You just have a picture of the planet, you see a melting glaciers. Everyone knows that whatever happened, emissions are responsible for air quality contamination issue of 8 million death per year. Do we need anything else? I mean, I don't think we need other rationale to say that we have to decrease our carbon emission, because, this death come from emission from fossil fuel. So the idea that we should limit our consumption of fossil fuel, you don't need to make this fantastic calculation. And because again, this calculation gives the idea that you are in a system where you turn certain knobs, no? And you align the cost of how much to invest today to the damage tomorrow. No, there is not such control. And again, this is a kind of epistemological error. If we can compute how much it will cost, then we know and we are in control, but we are not in control. We are largely driven by choices we have made in the past, and we are now not in a position to switch off all fossil fuel from today to tomorrow, and the process will be very complex. So why don't we discuss how to do that, rather than trying to tell the policymaker that, oh, I can make the case for you that this is really convenient to be done now because I can tell you how many dollars this will make in 2100.
Okay, but once again, one could say, okay, it's flawed, but it points to the right direction. I mean, if it convinces politicians and the public to spend money in measures that may have an immediate benefit, what's wrong with that? It may be an acceptable approximation. Or do you think that, for example, as in the Shanghai ranking, there is even some ideology in this thing?
Of course. Absolutely, this is the ideology, because in fact, if we go this way, we are not discussing the so-called model of development. And then in order to achieve this reduction, you start thinking of fantastic technological options like climatic engineering, carbon sequestration, and all these kind of things, which are really threatening in a sense, because these are things we have never done before, but which are already considered even by the IPCC as a mean to reduce carbon concentration. So the idea that we can, we live in a world where we try to sell the idea we can keep everything as we have now, and then at the same time we reduce our emissions. I believe this is very, very optimistic. This is not the way it is.
So it's the same comforting or sedating effect that you
in
see.
In a sense.
Okay. But for example, we are seeing now that some oil companies are starting to talk about, I don't know the name in English, these assets that you cannot, you will not be able to exploit anymore. Okay, so
you leave them in the ground. Yes, the idea that
exactly.
You leave them in the ground. Yes.
Leaving things in the ground was something that was very radical 10 years ago when somebody in Latin America said it, but now companies are starting to do it because they realize this will not give them money. So don't you think that making some economic calculation on top of climate change is good? In this case, it is really driving companies to take actions that may have a positive impact on climate, it seems to me.
Well, this can become a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if you link government subsidy to this calculation, of course, people will follow. That's why I say these numbers are also performative. Once they are in place, people follow them, like the H factor we were discussing before. No, once they are there, people use them, and then you are locked into using them into the same kind of model of development. But again, the issue on this is that there is even a social cost of carbon, which is calculated by various organizations. But again, those numbers are so terribly uncertain that I doubt that they have. They can have this function of pushing people when they become part of a kind of legislative process, and so they become part of it, and people can adapt to it. But then the way the actors will enter into this system will most often be by way of gaming, because this will also something which you should be very careful and see how the big producer react to these measures.
Gaming, you mean basically changing as little as they can, basically?
Exactly, gaming the measures.
Okay. So once again, here a big player is uncertainty once again. So some of these measures try to tame an uncertainty that by now it's impossible to tame, and provide the mistaken impression that uncertainty is less than the one that it's out there. Okay. if I understand correctly. Okay.
I don't know. It could be even worse. I could say that if we want to save the planet, we shouldn't entrust the planet to the economies, because seeing what the economies do with the economy, I would not give the planet to them to handle. You know, it has to be.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So once again, maybe a message for journalists would be to avoid crisp numbers and try to embark into more complex stories in which different stakeholders take a role. And maybe in this case, I would say story that go to the core of the system that produces these that produces emissions, and that
or Michele,
produces climate change. Yeah.
Or perhaps also looking at particular processes. Using extracting oil from tar sands is very dangerous. Shale gas fraction extraction are also very dangerous. One could also go and look and focus on a hotspot of danger and, you know, environmental threat.
Okay, fine. Okay, so let's move to the last example, and then there will be some time for broad questions if the public want to pose them. The last example is the very, very famous PISA ranking. So is something that is promoted, is carried out by carrying out tests in many different countries to students, school students, and it gives punctuation to the quality of the educational system of the country. This is, at least in the countries I know, really enormously influential. You know, you will find titles like "Why Finland performs so good in the PISA ranking and what should we imitate of it," or studies like, you know, "We have dropped in the PISA ranking, so it means our educational system is going really bad." Or countries that say, okay, by doing this and that, we have managed to improve our PISA ranking, and so it means that our students are coming out of schools better prepared. This has come under fire, let's say, from some years from now. There is even one of the critics of the PISA ranking has deemed it as the global super ministry of education, meaning that it's something that is really driving national policies from an organization that is not necessarily a democratically elected organization, and that not necessarily respond to the interests of the countries that are applying their rules. So could you tell us something about the PISA ranking and what you see, what are the issues that you see in it?
Well, let's talk about the positive side of the PISA ranking. The PISA ranking is something which is done every 3 years, and measure is applied to many countries, and not only to OECD countries, which are about 30 something, but to many more countries of the order of 80 or more. They provide comparable statistics for the educationalists to study how different educational systems do in different countries. So,
sorry to interrupt. OECD is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which is the promoter of the PISA ranking.
Exactly, the OECD, yeah, in Paris, they do this. So in a sense, this can be seen also from the point of view of people who study educational system as a bonanza, really something very useful to do comparative analysis of education. Okay, but there is not only PISA, there are also other international tests in mathematics, in science, which are very famous and very followed. But the point is that, as you mentioned, one consequence of the OECD PISA study is that the OECD has absorbed into itself competencies and authorities which once upon a time were with the national countries. So they have gained an epistemic authority which was taken away from someone else, in this case from the regional, because in some countries the education is the regional competence, from regional and national countries. Additionally, then we go to the epistemological error. What is measured? Mostly PISA measure science, mathematics, and reading abilities. It doesn't measure history and geography, to make just a simple example. So they make it this, because PISA is designed to build citizens for a future knowledge economy, no? To build citizens which will function in a So the ambition of PISA is really to prize those educational systems which will produce this kind of citizens which will work well in a knowledge economy. So they have already made the normative assumption that all countries want to become knowledge economy, which to me is quite weird. Why should all countries wish to become knowledge economy? And then, so as a result of PISA, you may have some certain subjects are neglected, but I mean, history and geography, I don't think history and geography could or should be neglected. And then additionally, what happened is that, again, a bit like in the case of cost of climate, this gives rise to all a machinery of people calculating how much a country would become richer if they could increase of so many PISA points. There was a report where they say, oh, if we could increase of 25 PISA points by 2090, again, you know, we are projecting into the future where we don't know what will be the world in 2090. But in 2090, there will be a 4 to 6% increase in GDP. I mean, you know, all those is pure madness. I mean, so we should, again,
it sort of creates policy expectations. So
exactly, yes, in a sense, yes.
Even in terms of money gained by a country, that
but this is dangerous, because then you are telling me that I should put all the money into reading mathematics and science and forget everything else. Humanities can, you know, you can forget. I mean, no, I'm not saying Greek and Latin. I'm saying geography and history. So I can.
Okay,
you know,
okay. And is it something that is already happening? That is this change in the curricula something that is actually happening?
This is what the people who complain say. I mean, there are many people, many educationalists who are up in arms against PISA. There has been a large movement of opposition. Some people say this PISA should stop. Other people say these tests should be more open, because they are very obscure now. PISA is now a black box. For instance, I'm an expert in uncertainty and sensitivity analysis. I cannot do this analysis on PISA because the data are not open. No, the questions are not open, and there is all a mechanism. So you cannot do a robustness analysis, for instance, of how this ranking is. But again, there are really a lot of consequences of this ranking, and we should be aware of them. I'm not saying, perhaps I'm not one of those who say discontinue PISA immediately, but I think we should give it a careful look and maybe rediscuss what kind of society we want to build, because the way we use PISA conditions the way we will build our own society.
Okay, so in order to move to the conclusion and the final discussion, there is a nice and broad question, because I wanted to leave, let's say, the broader questions on your approach at the end. One person in the public is asking, given the current exposure levels to data journalism, do you feel that the public is more accepting of uncertainty in numbers? So do you think that the fact that in the media we see more and more data, big data sometimes, makes people better prepared to understand that you cannot reduce it just to one number?
I believe that we are living in a period of change. I mean, you mentioned the article on Nature, which appeared a few weeks ago in June. I think a few years ago, it would have been totally impossible to publish such an article where you openly criticize mathematical models used in different fields. We use the case of COVID, but we also use other models for coastal erosion, for the economy, for various natural processes, and so on. So there is a kind of change in the perception of these things. As I said, we started where we all believe this could work, and then we increasingly start seeing the downside of this and the problem associated to this measure. And I believe this happened to the public and with the public, because the public, which, you know, then is ultimate consumers of those numbers, and which is also the ultimate consumers of your numbers. So if your public becomes more skeptical, but not skeptical in a cynical way, skeptical in the sense of, you know, what we call organized skepticism, not to say, okay, this is a number, but let me look, I mean, what was the sample? You hear about all these reproducibility crisis, you know, and this, now people know that when they hear that a given product is fantastic for your health, Well, they know this could or could not be because, we have heard this story before many times,
But what is your alternative? Okay, so if you are criticizing this traditional approach of trying to find indexes and measures, etc., I mean, are you simply saying, okay, let's stop measure, which may
No,
be
absolutely
opening the
not.
door
No, no,
to
no, no.
arbitrarity and going
No,
back
no, no.
to authority principle? Or, I mean, what are you proposing? If this is not good, what is
I
there a
don't.
qualitatively different way of approaching these issues, or is it just a matter of improving these indexes?
I don't want to drive my friends and colleagues out of a job. So no, people should keep measuring and doing models. I myself done a lot of modeling in my life. But as you said in the title of your session, is opening the box. We need to open those box. So what we say is that the way we should use these numbers should not be done acritically. Let me tell you something, which maybe is interesting for the listener. Some people in the discussion following the manifesto, some people said, oh, but the best model, the cutting edge models are big. And because they are big, they cannot be looked inside. Well, this is not acceptable. I mean, I don't believe society today will accept that because your model is so beautiful and so powerful, we cannot look into it because it's too big. You see, I
Okay,
mean,
okay.
this is something which we had to change. Let me make a final example, then I shut up. Meteorological model, they are terribly complex, no? But we trust them. When you look at this kind of modeling, society came to accept the way this model do and speak. So if the model says that tomorrow there is a 20% chance of rain, I'm not shocked. I say, okay, I accept that this model come with the uncertainty. On average, they are very good. So I use them, no? But we should reach the same level of maturity, of coexistence between society and models and numbers, if you wish, in all fields, not just in meteorological model.
Okay, okay. And something you said at the beginning is that there is also something that it's not, I mean, this idea of post-normal science. So the idea that it's not that scientists come with the solution to a problem, that's a solution that reduces the uncertainty, that reduces it to a number, but it's more a matter of a societal discussion in which different stakeholders take a role. And different expertises also take a role. I mean, I think this is clear in the current pandemic crisis. There is not one single expert from one single field that knows all the relevant information, and not even all together they know all the relevant information. So we cannot afford missing even one little bit piece of expertise, okay? However, my concern, something that I mentioned at the beginning, is in all these movements, like, for example, responsible research and innovation, etc., is which stakeholders do you bring in? There are a lot of stakeholders that are voiceless, okay? Patients organizations, a typical example of stakeholders that you would like to bring in scientific issues, sometimes they don't represent patients. They just represent one specific vision of certain specific patients. So do you think it is, isn't there a danger that by giving up the indexes and going through these more complicated dialogical processes goes back to, to authority principle, to those that have a stronger voice, to those that have more power, to those that have more social capital? How can we preserve the capacity of science of leveling the ground somehow?
Well, this is an important question which you are posing. One should write a book about that, and that they are all real and all urgent. But I would say that in which direction of complexity you want to move, the complexity of the construction of the model, or the complexity of the social process whereby this model is shared as widely as possible in the concept of the extended peer community of the post-normal science. Clearly, this is not a cure for all disease, because you could end up with the cacophony or voices. So you could end up with the more powerful actors, positioning themselves, which they do all the time. I mean, we already live in a world where organized minority, dictate the rule of the games against a disorganized majority. I mean, there have been economists that studied this for ages. So there is no magic stick, but I would say that the opacity, the secrecy of the instruments, they systematically play in the hands of the better organized, because they are those who have they have more money, they can pay for more of it, in a sense.
Okay, thanks a lot, Andrea. Now we must close, and I invite the public to check Andrea's website, not only because a lot of material is there, but because he regularly gives courses, and we have been talking for a lot of time of giving courses for science journalists, and maybe, who knows, this may be the starting point. If one is interested, you can contact Andrea. Thanks a lot, and I hope you have enjoyed the talk. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot, Michele. Ciao, bye.
Bye.